the psychology of people who unconsciously copy the accent and mannerisms of whoever they are talking to. You're on the phone with your grandmother. Somewhere around the third minute, without meaning to, your sentences slow down. Your vowels stretch. You say, "Oh, that's lovely," instead of "that's cool," and for a moment you sound a little like her. You hang up, and it's gone. Then later that day you're talking to a colleague who grew up somewhere far from you. And again, without deciding anything, without planning it, something in your voice starts to shift. The rhythm changes. The way you clip your consonants or roll a particular sound, you don't notice it until later, if you notice it at all. And maybe someone has pointed it out to you before. A friend laughing and saying, "You do that thing where you start talking like whoever you're around." Maybe they said it gently. Maybe they said it with a little edge, like they were accusing you of something, and you felt a flicker of embarrassment, maybe even a flicker of shame, like you'd been caught doing something dishonest, like you'd been caught pretending. But here's what nobody ever explains in that moment. You weren't pretending at all. What was happening in those conversations was something your brain learned to do long before you had any say in it. Something ancient. Something woven so deep into how humans function socially that calling it fake is like calling breathing a performance. The brain that quietly echoes the rhythms and sounds and gestures of the person in front of you isn't a brain that is being dishonest. It's a brain that is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And that changes everything. You're not broken. You're not a chameleon in the negative sense. You're not someone without a self. The fact that your voice shifts, that your posture mirrors, that your phrasing adapts, none of that means you're hollow or lost or too eager to please. What it means is that your nervous system is awake, that your brain is socially alive, that somewhere beneath the surface of your awareness you are constantly quietly reaching toward connection. And the way it does that is through sound, through gesture, through rhythm. This is one of the most misunderstood things about how humans work with each other. We assume that social adjustment is manipulation. We assume that staying the same is more authentic than adapting, but that assumption gets it backwards. Because adaptation, real unconscious instinctive adaptation, is not a mask you put on. It's a signal your body sends. It says, "I see you. I am with you. I am not a threat." That signal has kept humans safe for tens of thousands of years. There's a term researchers use for this. They call it the chameleon effect. And what's striking about it is how automatic it is. In studies where people were filmed in conversation, participants would unconsciously begin mimicking the posture, the facial expressions, the speaking pace of whoever they were talking to. Not because they were told to, not because they were aware of it, but because the brain had quietly decided this was the right social move to make. And crucially, the people on the receiving end of that mirroring felt more warmth toward the person doing it. They felt more understood. They felt a connection they couldn't quite name, but that felt real. Which tells you something important. This isn't a quirk of personality, it's the architecture of belonging. When you shift your tone to match someone else's rhythm, your brain is doing something that is simultaneously social, emotional, and neurological. There is a whole network of cells, mirror neurons, the brain's quiet understudies, that fire when you observe someone else doing or feeling something. They fire as though you were doing it yourself. They blur the line between you and the person across from you just enough to let empathy happen, just enough to let connection land. Your accent is changing because your nervous system is reaching out, because it found in the sound of another person's voice a thread, and it pulled on it. Now think back to when you were very young. You didn't choose your first accent, you absorbed it. You heard the people around you, parents, siblings, neighbours, and you began to match them. Not because you were told to, because that is how human children learn language. Not by studying rules, but by mirroring sound, by feeling their way into the music of other people's speech and finding their place inside it. That process never fully stops. It just goes underground. The child who learned to belong by matching the sounds and rhythms of their family grew into an adult whose nervous system still knows that trick, still reaches for it. In a meeting with a formal manager, the voice tightens and sharpens. In a conversation with an old friend from home, something loosens, something warmer and more familiar rises to the surface. At a family dinner, the phrases from childhood come back, unbidden, like muscle memory. None of this is chosen. None of it is conscious. It is the nervous system running a program that once made you safe, once made you seen, once made you one of the group rather than something separate and uncertain. And for some people, that program runs louder than in others. The people who mirror most intensely are often the people who grew up in environments where reading the room wasn't optional, where social safety depended on knowing, quickly and accurately, what kind of person you were dealing with and how to meet them where they were, where the cost of getting it wrong, of sounding foreign or formal or rough or soft when the room wanted something else, was real. Maybe it was a home where moods shifted fast and unpredictably, where you learned early to scan for signals, where the tone of a footstep in the hallway told you everything about how the next hour would feel. Children in environments like that develop what you might call a social sixth sense. They become extraordinarily attuned to other people. They catch frequencies most people miss, and one of the things that attunement produces is this. The voice adapts, the body mirrors, the self becomes quietly, fluidly flexible. It wasn't weakness that taught you this, it was intelligence, it was survival, it was a nervous system doing the very best it could with what it had. The trouble is that the brain doesn't always know when to stop running old software. So even now, in a coffee shop conversation with someone you've just met, in a phone call with someone you've known for years, in a meeting with a new client or a first date with someone who talks a little slower and softer than you normally do, the system activates, the voice shifts, the body leans in slightly, the rhythm changes, and you don't decide any of it. It just happens. There's something else happening here that goes even deeper than social safety. Something about the way the brain processes identity in relation to other people. We like to think of ourselves as fixed, as having a self that is stable and consistent across all situations, all conversations, all company. But the research on identity tells a more fluid story. The self is not a stone. It's more like water. It finds the shape of its container. And the container changes depending on who you're with. Psychologists sometimes call this the relational self. The idea that we don't have just one self, but many, each one slightly different depending on who we're standing next to. The version of you that exists in a conversation with your closest friend is genuinely different from the version of you that exists in a job interview. Not fake, in either case, just attuned, just responsive, just alive to context. For people who unconsciously copy accents and mannerisms, this relational shifting is simply more pronounced. Their nervous systems are more sensitive to the social frequency they're in. They respond more fully, they sink more deeply. They aren't losing themselves, they're extending themselves. They're making room, without thinking about it, for the other person to feel found. And now the part that nobody tends to mention when they're making fun of you for suddenly sounding Australian after talking to someone from Melbourne for 10 minutes. The people you mirror feel it, maybe not consciously, but something in the conversation changes when you unknowingly start echoing someone's speech patterns. The air between you shifts, the rapport builds faster, the other person relaxes in a way they can't quite account for. They say later that you're easy to talk to, that you made them feel comfortable, that there's something about you they can't put their finger on but they like, that something is this. You gave them the signal their nervous system was listening for. You said, in the only language that predates words, I'm with you, I'm not against you. We are in this moment the same. This is why mirroring is such a fundamental part of how humans bond. Therapists do it consciously, good listeners do it instinctively. Sales trainers teach it as a technique, which makes it sound calculated, which misses the point entirely. When it's authentic, when it's rising from somewhere beneath the level of strategy, it isn't technique, it's attunement, it's empathy made audible, made visible, made physical. There is a particular kind of person who goes through life feeling embarrassed by this quality, who catches themselves mid-sentence, suddenly aware that their voice has shifted toward the person they're talking to and feels a hot flush of something like shame, like they've revealed something weak about themselves, like they've shown that they don't have a solid core. This is one of the cruelest misreadings of a gift, because what you're actually revealing in those moments is not instability, it's sensitivity, and sensitivity is not a soft word. It is not a consolation prize. Sensitivity is the thing that allows humans to feel their way into each other's experience. It is the raw material of connection, of compassion, of every meaningful relationship that has ever existed between two people. Without it, you get correctness without warmth. You get words without music. You get people who technically understand each other and still feel completely alone. The person who mirrors, who shifts their sound and rhythm and posture toward whoever they're with, carries this sensitivity in their voice, in their body, in the constant low hum of their social awareness. They feel the people around them, they respond, and some part of them may never have been told that this is not a flaw to be corrected, but a capacity to be honoured. Now, it's worth sitting with something that might feel uncomfortable, because mirroring, like most things that live in the body, carries its full complexity. There are times when it serves you beautifully, and there are times when it costs something. If you grew up learning that your safety depended on matching the people around you, then you may have also learned, somewhere along the way, to disappear into those people, to become whatever the room needed, to mute the parts of yourself that didn't fit. And in those cases, the mirroring isn't just empathy, it's also armoring. It's a protective layer that says, if I become like you, you won't be able to reject me, because I'll have left nothing of myself exposed. This is worth knowing, not as a judgment, not as a reason to stop mirroring, which you probably can't do entirely anyway, but as a way of understanding what the behaviour is carrying. Sometimes the echo of another person's voice in your own is connection, and sometimes it's cover. The brain doesn't always know the difference, it just does what worked before, and this is where it gets interesting, because the story of this behaviour doesn't stay the same across your life. It changes, it evolves, it means something different at 30 than it did at 13, something different at 50 than it did at 25. In adolescence, the mirroring tends to be intense. Identity is forming. The self is trying on shapes. The accent of the friend group, the posture of the admired, the speech patterns of whoever seems to hold belonging, all of it gets absorbed and reflected back. Teenagers are doing this constantly, desperately, visibly. It's not imitation for its own sake, it's identity construction through contact. It's the self reaching toward form by pressing against other people and taking their impression. In early adulthood, the mirroring often gets quieter, more specific, more targeted. You've started to solidify. You know what your voice sounds like at rest. You know what your rhythm is when you're comfortable. But you still shift, still mirror, still adapt, and now you have a little more awareness of when it happens. You catch yourself sometimes. You find it interesting instead of alarming. By middle age, something else tends to happen. The mirroring becomes more consciously appreciated, both in yourself and in others. You've been in enough conversations to understand what it feels like to talk to someone who truly meets you, who shifts toward you, who adjusts their register to yours. And you know by now that this is rare, that not everyone can do it, and you start to see the gift in it. Not because you've fixed anything, not because the behaviour has been improved or refined, but because you've lived long enough to see its effects. You've watched how rooms soften when you walk into them. You've felt how people open up to you, confide in you, choose you for conversations that matter. And you start to understand that the thing you were embarrassed by was, all along, one of the best things about you. There is also what happens when the mirroring starts to feel hollow. This is something people who mirror deeply sometimes encounter, usually in their late 20s or 30s, sometimes earlier. A strange moment in a conversation where they've adapted so fully to the person across from them that they lose track of what they themselves were thinking before the conversation started. They look inward for their own voice and hear a kind of static, an echo chamber with no source. This is not a breakdown of identity. It is more like a system running too hard for too long. The nervous system that is always listening, always adjusting, always translating the frequency of the room into a version of itself that fits. It gets tired. Not from the mirroring itself, but from doing it in every direction at all times without any counterweight. What it needs in those moments is not the room. It needs the quiet, the space where there's no one to adapt toward, where the voice can find its own pitch without reference to anything else. Solitude, for people like this, is not loneliness, it is restoration. It is the place where the echo stops and the source can be heard again. Think about the person in your life who is easiest to talk to, the one you feel most understood by after a conversation, the one who seems to effortlessly match your energy, who is quieter when you need quiet, warmer when you need warmth, a little more animated when you've brought something exciting, who laughs exactly as much as the moment calls for, who sits in a silence comfortably when silence is what the conversation needs. That person is mirroring you, probably without knowing it, probably without planning it. Their nervous system has recognized yours and is reaching toward it, and the result is that you feel seen, you feel met, you feel less alone. Now consider that you do this for the people around you, that when you shift your tone, when your accent drifts, when your posture opens or closes to match the person across from you, you are being that person for them, the one who makes them feel comfortable before they have words for why, the one they remember afterward as easy to be around, the one the room feels a little different when they leave. You're doing that without trying, without knowing, without any credit for it. The brain that does this, that listens not just to the words but to the music behind the words, the rhythm, the weight, the colour of a person's way of speaking, is a brain that is built for human contact at a depth that most people don't access automatically. It requires a kind of attunement that is genuinely rare. A social sensitivity that sees people not just as information to be processed but as frequencies to be felt. And yes, it sometimes means you don't know exactly where you end and someone else begins in a conversation. Yes, it sometimes means that after talking to 3 very different people in one afternoon, you feel a little wrung out, a little scattered, like you need a moment to find out which layer of yourself is actually you today. That's real. That's a cost. But the alternative, the completely fixed, unmirrorable, socially inflexible self, doesn't actually connect more deeply because of that rigidity. It just doesn't shift. And not shifting isn't the same as being more authentically present. Sometimes it's the opposite. The person who meets you in your register, who speaks your tempo back to you, who finds the shape of your energy and moves in it, that person is not less themselves. They are more human, more connected, more alive to the specific gravity of the specific person in front of them. You probably picked this up long before you had a name for it, long before anyone explained to you what was happening or why. You just noticed, at some point, that you could move between people, that you could enter a room and find your footing quickly. That conversations felt natural to you in a way they didn't seem to feel natural for everyone, that people talked to you, that they told you things, that something about being around you made other people feel safe enough to say what they actually meant. You never thought of that as a skill. You thought of it as just what you did, just how you were. Maybe you even thought of it as a lack of a solid self, a lack of consistency, a lack of the kind of permanence you saw in people who seemed the same in every room they walked into. But permanence isn't depth, it's just weight. What you have is something more dynamic than that, more alive. It is a self that is responsive, that is attuned, that is in constant quiet conversation with the world around it. A self that doesn't hold a single note but knows how to harmonize. And there's one more thing, one more layer to this that doesn't get talked about enough. The people who mirror most readily are often the people who listen most fully, not just to words, to everything, the pace of someone's sentences, the moment where the voice softens and the real thing is almost said, the half-second of hesitation before a joke that tells you whether it's actually funny to them or whether they're hoping you'll make it safe. They catch all of it, they process all of it, and without any deliberate intention, their bodies respond, and their voices follow. This kind of listening is not passive. It is one of the most active things a human being can do. It is exhausting sometimes, in the way that any deep attention is exhausting. But it produces something rare. It produces conversations that actually go somewhere, exchanges that leave both people feeling fuller than when they started, connections that don't require enormous amounts of explanation or setup or social scaffolding, because the mirroring has done something quieter and faster. It has communicated safety before a single meaningful word has been spoken. So the next time someone notices it, the next time someone says you sound a little like them now, or asks why you're suddenly talking slower, or points out that your accent shifted, you don't have to feel caught. You don't have to feel like you've been seen doing something suspect. What you've been seen doing is listening. What you've been seen doing is connecting. What you've been seen doing is something the brain developed over hundreds of thousands of years of human contact precisely because it works. Precisely because it is one of the oldest and most reliable signals one person can send to another. I am here. I hear you. We are in this moment not strangers. Your voice is not inconsistent, it is responsive, and there is an enormous difference between the two. You move through the world carrying a kind of social intelligence that most people take for granted in you, without ever recognizing it as intelligence at all. They just feel comfortable around you. They just find you easy. They just feel, without knowing why, that they can say the actual thing, that they don't have to edit themselves quite as much, that the conversation is going to go somewhere real. That is your doing. That is your nervous system reaching toward theirs, without agenda, without strategy, without performance. Just the ancient, quiet signal of a human being who has learned, somewhere deep in the body, that belonging is the thing, that connection is the thing, that if you can find someone's frequency and move a little bit in it, something real can happen between you. This is not something to fix. This is not something to be ashamed of. This is something to understand, and in understanding it, to carry a little more gently, a little more knowingly, a little more kindly toward yourself. You weren't pretending. You never were. You were just, in the only way your body knew how, trying to reach someone, and you probably did.